Vladimir Putin humiliates Donald Trump by breaking the energy truce in Ukraine, though the White House is unsurprised. The United States Senate has called for providing Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, and the Ukrainian and American delegations have agreed on truly effective security guarantees. Where will European and American troops enter the war if Russia attacks Ukraine again? That's a brief summary of today's events. But to be more specific, after Russia's massive overnight strike on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the United States Senate called on President Donald Trump to finally begin supplying Tomahawk cruise missiles to Kyiv. The Senate stated directly that Donald Trump's tactics are not working and Vladimir Putin is cynically and harshly humiliating the American president. After all, having promised Trump a week-long energy truce, the Kremlin couldn't even go 4 days without launching strikes. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated directly that Ukraine's negotiating position has now changed after such a massive ballistic strike. Trump himself said that he is expecting good news from the negotiations, saying that something very important awaits us. Although the White House stated that they are not at all surprised by how Vladimir Putin violated the energy agreement. But it's important to note that in negotiations with the United States, Ukraine has made a real breakthrough, and this breakthrough concerns security guarantees. This is the most interesting part of this Financial Times issue, writes a agency to NATO. Mark Ryuta, who was in Kyiv today, confirms that Ukraine and its Western partners have reached an agreement on a military response if Moscow violates a future ceasefire agreement. That means we're talking about the actual involvement of Western troops against Russia, and this is already an interesting point. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and leave your comment under this episode. Also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in this video's description. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid partnership. Subscribe to the Telegram channel, the link to it is in the description of this video. I would be grateful for any support from you because thanks to your donations we are able to keep working. So let's go through everything step by step. The Russian Federation violated a personal request from United States President Donald Trump and launched a massive strike on Ukraine at the height of the winter cold. Now Kyiv expects a response from Washington to this terrorist crime. Volodymyr Zelensky made this statement after the massive attack on the night of February 3rd, and now I will quote him. We expect a response from the United States to the Russian strikes. It was specifically America's proposal during the time of diplomacy and such cold winter weather to stop strikes on the energy sector. There was a personal request from the President of the United States to the Russian Federation, and Russia responded to that request. A record in ballistics from the week that Russia was asked about didn't even last 4 days. This also speaks to everything else that Russia promises or might promise in the future. If they can't keep their word now, what can we expect going forward? They are incorrigible in Moscow and want to take advantage of the cold because they can't conquer us, Ukraine, with their assaults. Russia's bet on war must be answered by the whole world. By the way, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who was in Kyiv today, also stated that Russia is showing no signs of readiness for real peace. At the same time, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt simply stated that Donald Trump, quote, was not surprised by Russia's latest attack on Ukraine, although he himself had actually asked Putin to stop these shellings. Donald Trump himself, before Russia's attack, stated that his administration may soon have good news about its work on resolving Russia's war against Ukraine. But if the good news turns out to be a massive attack on Ukraine's energy sector, then that's clearly not good news. Although Volodymyr Zelensky clearly stated that Ukraine would adjust its position in peace negotiations because of Russia's massive strike on energy facilities, he emphasized that the attack on February 3rd was targeted and included a record number of ballistic missiles. Here is the quote. In fact, the Russian army took advantage of the American proposal to pause strikes for a short time, not to support diplomacy, but simply to stockpile missiles and to wait. The coldest days of the year, when temperatures in much of Ukraine are -20 degrees Celsius and lower, As a result, this Russian attack triggered the necessary actions, no matter how cynical that may sound. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham called on United States President Donald Trump to start supplying Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. Here's the quote. After this massive attack last night, I urge President Trump to finally begin the process of providing Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. What would be a game changer in military terms? He noted that previous attempts to put pressure on Vladimir Putin to make him stop the aggression and sit down at the negotiating table have not yielded any results. And he suggested strengthening measures that undermine the economy of the Russian Federation, well, along with the supply of Tomahawks. That's another quote. President Trump's idea of punishing Putin's clients who buy oil and finance his war machine should be supported by the United States and Europe. If other major buyers follow India's example, it will help put an end to this bloodbath. Well, what is meant is that India recently made a deal with Trump that they are going to completely stop buying Russian oil. Lindsey Graham also expressed the opinion that any negotiations with Russia that look like excessive encouragement of aggression could lead to catastrophic consequences for the whole world. And here I should note that the issue of supplies to Ukraine has been discussed since the fall of 2025. At the end of October, there were already reports that the Pentagon had approved such a transfer, considering it safe for the United States' own stockpiles. But the final decision rests with Donald Trump, and according to sources, the United States president viewed this move as leverage against Russia. But then, he backed down and said that he believes Vladimir Putin's words that Russia wants peace, but Russia is furious now for another reason. On February 4 and 5 in Abu Dhabi, Ukraine will hold negotiations not only with the Russians but also separately with the American delegation. And the visit of NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte to Kyiv today was not accidental, Financial Times writes. And Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General who was in Kyiv, confirmed directly from the podium of the Verkhovna Rada that Ukraine and its Western partners have reached an agreement on a military response to Moscow's violation of a future ceasefire agreement. This plan assumes that within the first 24 hours after a Russian provocation or military invasion, there should be a response from the Ukrainian army and a diplomatic warning to Moscow. If hostilities continue after this warning, then a second phase of intervention will begin with the use of force. A coalition of willing countries, including European Union member states, as well as the United Kingdom, Norway, Iceland, and Turkey, all of this fits within the framework of those very security guarantees for Ukraine from the West. Moving on, the document states that if Russian military provocations escalate into a large-scale attack, 72 hours after the first initial ceasefire violation, coordinated military actions by Western-backed forces will begin involving the United States Army. Let's go over it again. In the first 24 hours after the attack, Ukraine defends itself, while the West diplomatically warns the Kremlin that it will enter the war. If Russia doesn't stop within 72 hours, the Americans and Europeans are obliged to intervene in the war and attack the Russians. It's not a perfect plan, but it's much better than the Budapest Memorandum, where there were no obligations at all. If you read the document carefully, there really are no legal obligations there. Here it's written so that our allies have to get involved in this situation. But why is there this division of 24 hours and 72? Here, the military explains that there might be some kind of unintentional provocation on the front line, maybe a breakdown or a ceasefire violation, but supposedly it's not a full-scale attack. So, in order not to get involved in a war right away, our Western allies say that within 24 hours Ukraine tries to handle this provocation on its own. If it doesn't work out and it really turns into a full-scale attack, then after 72 hours our Western partners intervene militarily. And let me remind you that in December it is known that things are peaceful. Out of the 20 points, there were provisions according to which a non-aggression pact is concluded between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, with monitoring of the situation along the line of contact. Kyiv receives security guarantees from the United States, NATO, and Europe. By analogy with Article 5 of the North Atlantic Alliance Charter, in the event of a renewed Russian invasion, according to this point, a military response and the reinstatement of sanctions should follow. This scenario was discussed in December and January and involved a multi-level response to a possible violation by Russia and the agreed ceasefire. In particular, officials from the three parties discussed the details of the plan in Paris in December and on January 3 in Kyiv. The negotiations were conducted between the national security advisors of those countries that are willing to participate in the coalition of the willing. As a result, today, on February 3rd, Mark Rutte, speaking from the podium in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, stated that Western troops will be immediately deployed in Ukraine after the signing of the peace agreement. It was also stated that the Europe-led deterrence forces will provide measures to strengthen security in the air, at sea, and on land after the ceasefire, with intelligence and logistical support from the United States. Well, let's see how this will turn out in practice. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like the video. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel with your donation using the links and details in the description of this video and by scanning the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye.